And we finally got to a point one day when we were clearing out an area and we were waiting for the okay clear to kind of move forward. And that's when one of our soldiers hit an IED, an improvised explosive device. He hit it, I think it was either with his foot or with some of the British, they use these, I don't know what they call them, but basically looks like a metal detector. So he either hit it with his foot or that, I'm not exactly sure. But he set off a big IED that was inside of a grape hut.
What was it like the first time that you went outside the wire?
I only went outside the wire on the operation I went with the British, and I only went one time and I was gone for a week. I flew in at night and we were on an op that I didn't know a whole lot about. I had very limited information given to me, but I was with the British. We flew on an op and it was pitch black. We flew in the middle of the night. So we landed, I think we left at like 1 a.m. and we were where we were going to be hours before morning prayer, which is roughly around like, I think like 4-ish in the morning. And so it's pitch black and it's a hard, solid ground. It's weird because when you walk outside the wire, when you're on the ground, you don't really know what's under it. And that's the thing, is like one of the biggest, most used tools that it felt like was utilized was the IEDs. And sort of any sort of improvised explosive device, they were very strategic in where they placed, and they were very effective in taking out soldiers. So when you get there, you don't really realize that things could be under your feet. You just kind of move and you go, and you're aware of it, but subconsciously you have to move and do your job. So it was the middle of the night when I got there, but it wasn't a great week. So being outside the wire is not. I mean, everyone, when they're bored, then they're inside the fobs or the calf. Like, I want to go do something. It's like, well, you don't actually. You just think you do.
So, IED, improvised explosive
device.
So that could literally be anything once you're outside the wire. Is there a most common type of device you would see, or it's literally just like whatever someone has, they'll make a bomb out of it?
I wish I had more knowledge for you. Like I said, if you were talking to somebody who was maybe a 15, 17, 10-year multiple deployments person, they'd have more clear, concise answers for you. But basically what I could see and what I was seeing when we were there was anything was being utilized. We weren't allowed to throw out batteries or anything like that, because what they would do is they would string a whole bunch of dead batteries together, just enough to get a spark, and use pressure plates. So some of the things we'd be finding outside the wire would be old saws. They would take old saws and they'd put them together, one on top of the other. And then when somebody would step on it, it would act as the pressure plate device to set it off. And so they would use a lot of garbage, our old garbage, against us, and they would plant them in the ground where you wouldn't know they were there. You'd trip over a wire, it could go off. They use a ton of different ways. If anything, they were incredibly good at utilizing really unconventional tools to make effective bombs. Like, they really did a great job. They use these things called daisy chain IEDs, which they can put in the walls, and it's just basically one explosion turns on another explosion, turns on another, and it's all the way through. And so IEDs were everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere. That's why if you talk to an Afghan or Iraq vet, it's like you're not going to ever see them kick a piece of garbage over, like, ever. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, anything on the ground could be something that could just take your life instantly.
Not even just on the ground. It could be in the walls. It could be anything. It didn't really matter. They would put them on the road. They put them under the cauldrons, under the bridges. Like, they put them anywhere and everywhere. And like the big ones they would put on the roads, the ones that would take out tanks and Humvees and stuff like that. I mean, they would attach massive amounts of gasoline tanks to these. Like, they'd fill up big blue drums, put them in the ground, attach multiples to them. So when they blew, it was a huge explosion.
So are you able to walk me through that week outside the wire, like when you were with the British?
I'll give you a little bit. I try to stay away from it. I've spoken about it pretty publicly multiple times. And it's always come back to be a very interesting response. Although I do have a book coming out in July where I illustrate and go through it in a various depths. But yeah, we were with the Brits. I really didn't get any situational awareness. I had no idea what we were really meant to do. My whole job was to look after the women and children, meaning I was the CST. I was a cultural support team. And in Afghanistan, men can't touch the women, can't take the burqas off. Obviously, due to religion, they can't touch the children either. So from like a certain age and under. So often when we would go into these compounds and these things, what they were seeing is women and children would normally flee. But it finally got to a point where they weren't fleeing anymore. And soldiers would kick open the door and there'd be a bunch of women and kids. But the Taliban got smart and wise to that and realized that a lot of Americans and people weren't bringing women with them, which means they could hide, whether it be radios or money or ICOM radios, anything that they didn't want the Americans or people or the British or whomever to find. They would hide them within the women's burqas or their hair or things like that, because they didn't ever have anybody to touch the women. So I was with the Brits. I was their CST, and my job was, when we kick a door in, would be able to take all of the women and kids and put them in a separate room. And then I would be in there by myself, searching every single one of them head to toe, methodically, individually, and looking for weapons, looking for radios, looking for money. They like stacks and stacks of money meant, okay, where did you get that from and why do you have it? All the way down to drugs, pretty much anything that they looks like could be some type of contraband was my job was to find. And it was always a shock because I looked like a small male soldier, just because my hair's tucked in, I'm wearing the same gear, doing the same things. And so I think it was on day 2, we lost a soldier. We were going from compound to compound, and we were in firefights quite frequently. And we finally got to a point one day when we were clearing out an area and we were waiting for the okay clear to kind of move forward. And that's when one of our soldiers hit an IED, an improvised explosive device. He hit it, I think it was either with his foot or with some of the British, they use these, I don't know what they call them, but basically it looks like a metal detector. So he either hit it with his foot or that, I'm not exactly sure, but he set off a big IED that was inside of a grape hut. And that killed him instantly, which was quite tragic to witness. And the individual that was standing was down on one knee doing cover fire. He also took a big part of the blast and had his left side quite damaged. And so that one was quite a tragic event, and it was very difficult to witness. After that, often the Taliban and Al-Qaeda like to use those moments and film them. They're always watching. If something like that goes off, they're watching. They like to film it. They like to utilize it as propaganda videos. And so also it sets like a secondary device or a trigger. So once that goes off, people rush in to get help and then they attack them. So that's what happened to us. We all rushed forward, and then they started shooting mortars downrange at us and then started shooting live fire at us. And then while we were waiting for the Pedro helicopters, which are the Blackhawks, to come pick up what was left of the soldier and the other individual that was hurt, while one comes in, these guys are the most experienced, brave. I'm still yet to have a Pedro on my show, but I am looking to speak with someone who did fly a Blackhawk for those, because they will come in when others won't. And they would come in and pick up the casualties, and they would do everything they can to keep them alive. And then while that's happening, another one would take off and lay down living hell on anybody they saw on the ground that caused what just happened. And so I owe the firing and one of our soldiers who did survive, who ultimately passed away later on. We do owe a lot to those people. So after that incident, we spent the rest of the week just in and out of firefights, left, right, and center. We didn't sustain, my unit when I was with them didn't sustain another. I heard over the radio there was another, I think it was, because I was with a platoon of people and I got moved around. So I didn't stay with one group of people. I would get shuffled from point A to point B to point C, depending on who needed a female operator. There was another Canadian that was also with us, but I never saw her. She got shuffled in between as well, but I am aware that she did experience a similar situation where an ANA went inside a building and an IED went off, and we lost some more soldiers that way, and she was right behind it. So There was a lot of loss sustained by the British in the summer of 2009, as well as the Americans. I know the British took one of the biggest hits of all of the war, if I'm not mistaken, in the Helmand province, Pandra district and whatnot. But the Brits that I knew took serious hits the week I was with them, as well as subsequently the couple weeks after I wasn't with them. The people that I was just with, we did lose a handful of those guys as well.
So the Taliban, you mentioned they'll film this stuff that goes on when an IED blast goes off. Are they they're looking for a response from you, and then in the film, will they cut out the initial blast so it just looks like soldiers are shooting at the Taliban, or like
no, they want to see the soldier die.
Okay, so they're using it as internal propaganda to
and
kind of like
they put it on Twitter, like the Taliban has Twitter.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen some horrific videos, and just hearing about a particular incident where that comes from, and like the thinking behind, the thinking behind a group of people from which I've never encountered a person from, or knowingly encountered a person from. It's difficult to wrap my head around someone who would do that.
Oh, but it wasn't just someone. There's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
And they praise it when it happens. You can hear them on the ICOM radio praising God, being happy, celebrating. Like it's a really difficult thing. I wish you could speak to somebody who has experienced a lot more than I have, because I'm just one person who was injured in one operation. I know guys who have done 8, 9, 10, 15 tours of this, throughout their life, where they're taking down bad guys like it's going out of style, like they're flies. And these guys have witnessed some of the most horrific things known to man. But we all have our burden to bear, our story to tell. But my situation just happened to be what it was, and I was just in a shitty place at a shitty time, and it's difficult to witness. It's difficult to witness that happen, and it's difficult to witness evil in that way. And that's the one thing I learned over there was, how are you supposed to win a war when the enemy is not playing by the same rules? When you indiscriminately bomb anybody, like the same people that would try to kill our soldiers are fucking killing, Afghan schoolgirls. Like they're extremism applies in any sort of religion and culture. There is an extreme version of everything. And so I happen to just be fighting an extreme version of there, but the people from that country, they're not all like that. They don't all feel that way. They don't all think that way. I just happen to be fighting a in particular, very evil subset of brainwashed individuals who believe that killing innocents is the way to God and 72 virgins. Like, it's not, people do anything when you brainwash them to that point. And what's really tragic is they used to use women and kids. They'd strap IED vests to kids. They'd put a backpack full of explosives with toys around it and then blow the fucking thing up. Like, there was no remorse. There was no care for human life. They didn't give a shit. And they showed that, and they showed that in a real cruel way. And then you're going to get listeners who are going to go, well, that's really unfair of her to, judge a whole culture that way. And I'm not. I'm judging the extremist version that I fought against. And then there's also going to be the people that are going to say, well, you went to war. How would you feel if somebody kicked your door open in the middle of the night? I'm like, you're right. I'd blast a motherfucker with a shotgun. You're right. I don't want anyone kicking my door in. But when I went for a mission, and I was going to complete that mission, and I knew what I was going to do. And what I was told is that I was going to help women and kids. Now, the reality, 20 years later, we know that wasn't the whole goal. We understand politics, we understand money, and we understand how things work. But at the time, what I was told, what I believed in, was what I was doing was right.
Yeah. So when a blast goes off like that from an IED, what is the protocol? Like, because is that's just the beginning of
Yeah.
the fight. That's like
hmm
the kickoff. What's the protocol, and what does that do to your senses of your body and mind trying to react in that moment and knowing that there's something you should be doing versus like what you're actually experiencing?
Well, that's when the muscle memory comes into play, right? You
Hmm.
learn, you train how you think you're supposed to fight. You train to fight.
Hmm.
You don't train to be docile. So when the IED blast went off, the comms went crazy, and the interpreters were sitting beside the ICOM, and you could listen and you could hear them, the Taliban praising God over it and being grateful, and then it set all hell loose. Like I said, they started shooting mortars at us, and those are fucking indiscriminate and inaccurate. So you never know where those are going to land. And um, they can be accurate, but I mean, the way the Taliban shoot things, most of the time they're not accurate at all. That's why IEDs were so proficient and did such damage over such a long period of time and took so many lives, because you just got to step on it. You just got to be near it. You don't have to shoot and aim. You just blow it up. The damage is so
Hmm.
drastic. So for me, when it happened, comms went off and we were waiting to go and we were ready to move. It took me a long time to wrap my head around what I just saw. But once we got the all clear, couple, it must have been no more than a couple minutes after the blast went off, a bunch of us just took off running towards it.
Is it just
Um,
like a flash of light, or do you see things flying up in the air? Like what did it actually look like?
No, well, I mean, it's different in every situation, right?
Mhm.
It's in my situation personally, I watched somebody be blown into pieces and what was left to fly through the air. So it he was in a building that the blast obviously went upwards and outwards. So when you watch something like that happen, it's like something out of a movie. You can't wrap your brain around what you just witnessed because it seems so damn foreign, because where else would you ever have seen something like that? So
Yeah.
for me, it took a minute to realize what I had just witnessed, and once I did and everything, the ground shook and everyone, the comms panicked. Once we got the okay to go, that's when we ran, and that's when we ran towards it. And I went over to the medic and helped him with something, and then ran over towards the grape hut with a couple other guys, and we were ready to fight. We take the fight to the fucking enemy. We're not going to sit there and let them come to us. So we move forward, we move up, and what we end up doing was body collection and what was left. And so while the fighting was going on, we were collecting as much as we could, because no soldier, no piece of, or any soldier ever gets left behind. And we were collecting everything we could. We put everything we could on a stretcher, and then we ran through fucking open fire as fast as we could with what we had left to those Blackhawks and to get him on the plane.
Does time feel different in that
Yeah,
moment?
it moves slow. It's like it's like yeah, like I said, I've talked about that before. It's like slows down. It's like that slow motion where it's like no matter how fast you move, your body isn't going. It's that like in a movie where you're just tunnel vision, everything goes black and it's hyper tunnel vision, and your adrenaline kicks up to like a 12, and you're trying to run and you're running and you're moving fast, but you feel like you're moving like that and you can't get going fast enough. No matter what you do, it just felt like you couldn't go fast enough. That was my experience, because I had never, like I said, the day before that, we were in firefights all day. We were getting hit all night long, but I didn't, it just wasn't the same. When you watch when you watch what we watched happen, your body just it shuts
Mhm.
down in a way. Part of it just shuts off and the other part kicks on, and you just go.
So it's like your time is slowing down. You it's you're running, doing things in slow motion. In your like that's the physicality of it. In your mind, is it also slow? Like do you
Mm-mm.
feel like does your actual perception change of the passing of time, or is it purely from a physical standpoint, like you're in a dream and you're trying to run faster?
Well, I don't know, because I mean it's been so long
Mhm.
for me, but from what I can gather, what I could remember, it was very much I could hear my heartbeat. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears very clearly. I couldn't move fast enough. My breathing was fast paced. Everything, the adrenaline, I've never felt adrenaline like that in my life. And even now when I think about those times, it's my body somewhat disassociates from the real feelings of that because it causes such a cortisol spike and it causes such a reaction to my body that I just start shaking. And it's something that left a massive scar on me for a very, very long time. And it's something that, you know, I experienced with a handful of people, and then trying to articulate that to those people who were not a part of that is very difficult because it's not something anybody should have to experience. But I did choose to go. I did choose to go to do my job. I was proud of my job. I was proud of my service. And I was proud to get the opportunity to go with the Black Watch. I was very proud of what I did with them. And I showed up. And like I said, that comes down to what I said before. You just got to show the fuck up. Even if it's difficult, you just got to show up. And I was fortunate that I didn't freeze. Because you don't, you know, you practice all your drills, you do all of these things so that if you know, it does get confronted with it, you don't freeze. And some people I know still do freeze. I was lucky in that moment for whatever reason, whether it was because of the support of the guys I had around me, which I think 99% of it was. I wanted to show up for them.